It never goes away completely, right? Obviously, there's comfort being that I've been with the president for quite some time between, roughly the 5 years I was with him before, then the campaign, and then the 3 years that I was in a leadership position on PPD. I'm with him multiple times a week. So there's a comfort there, but he's still the president, right? It's kind of, again, it's an ever-present thing that's the commander in chief and the leader of the free world, and I don't think you ever lose that, and you shouldn't really. I think it's important to kind of keep that perspective of this is what we're doing and this is why we do it because of the importance of that person's role.
I'm talking to Deputy Assistant Director Darryl Volpicelli about something this agency never talks about: presidential protection. While he's an executive in our agency now, up until last month, DAD Volpicelli was the special agent in charge of the Presidential Protective Division. When you see photos of the president, the PPD SAC is usually the agent beside him, more often than not just out of frame. As PPD SAC, DAD Volpicelli was responsible for every facet of presidential protection. It's a position with a front seat to history, and we're talking to him about that today. This is a very cool episode, and I think you're going to enjoy it. I'm Abel Trevino, and you're listening to Standing Post.
Welcome to the studio, sir. I know you and I have talked over email, but we actually haven't met until just now. So could you introduce yourself to both me and our audience?
Sure, Abel. My name is Darryl Volpicelli. I am the Deputy Assistant Director of the Office of Intergovernmental and Legislative Affairs, newly appointed in that role. I've been here about a month. Prior to that, I was the Special Agent in charge of the Presidential Protective Division. I've been with the agency for about 23 years. I was in the role of the Special Agent in charge for about 2 years.
And where did you go to school at, and how did you wind up coming to the Secret Service?
So I went to Bucknell University in Pennsylvania, where I double majored in political science and sociology. I was also the captain of the track and field team there. It's kind of an interesting story how I ended up with the Secret Service. Don't come from a long line of folks in law enforcement within my family. I was working in Atlanta at the time, studying to go to law school, thinking I didn't actually attend law school, but preparing for that. The inspiration, did have some interest in federal law enforcement, FBI, Secret Service, but the genesis of my exact interest in the Secret Service was actually the Columbine shooting, which is unique. I think a lot of people, see presidential protection and see that, and that's their aspiration. But the National Threat Assessment Center did work after the Columbine shooting with the exceptional case study. I found that very interesting. It's obviously really important work that Dr. Al-Athari and NTAC does to this day in terms of minimizing and mitigating mass violence. So that was the genesis for me applying to the Secret Service, was what was done there. I thought it was really interesting work. I was fortunate to get on at a pretty young age. Started my career up in New York after that.
Have you been able to work with the NTAC and some of the reports that they generate?
That's the great irony is after 23 years, even though there's the inspiration for joining the Secret Service, I really haven't done anything with NTAC other than setting some things up when I was assigned to Miami and doing some of the larger symposiums in coordinating all that. But I hadn't really done much in NTAC in my career, nor have I done really much in the protective intelligence realm, other than being them providing me information when I was in protective roles. So it's the kind of the great irony of what your inspiration is to how your career goes. It takes many turns.
That's true. And I'm glad that you brought up like the protective mission and the protective intelligence that they do, because one of the reasons I wanted to bring you onto the show was you were the special agent in charge of PPD, which is for our agency and the type A personalities that come to it. Everyone is kind of gunning for that ultimate position because you're really the guy who's right beside the president. If there are photos of the president, you're definitely not far away from them. What's it like to have that kind of responsibility and to be selected for the pinnacle of the protective roles?
It's an interesting question. I've said this when I was appointed. I said it to my workforce on PPD, and I'll say it to you now, if you would ask me 3.5 years ago, would I be sitting at a podcast talking about my experience as the special agent in charge? I would have kind of laughed at that. I was in Miami at the time when selected. I thought I would, compete for the SAC spot down there and finish my career in Miami. So when it came post-campaign, I was honored. It's the honor of my career, one of the great honors of my life to be appointed to that position and be asked. I initially started as the deputy special in charge of the president's detail, and then after 1 year became the special in charge. I didn't come right into the role. But even so, even as the deputy, you're honored, you take it, obviously, and then the gravity starts to kind of set in, right? In terms of what it means to be in charge, right? What mission failure can mean, not just to the agency, but obviously to the United States and all that comes with it, right? It's a zero fail mission as it pertains to all our protectees, but clearly as it pertains to the president and his family. So that gravity does sit in. On a personal level, one of the things that did affect me is, I was the 37th special agent in charge. There are 36 people that came before me. And, with that, they've all left kind of an indelible mark in their time. And, with that, I really, had a lot of pride to kind of protect that legacy and try to continue that kind of excellence.
Now that you've been in that role, what do you think the mark that you made on it was?
It's a good question. I'd hope the workforce feels that, I supported them. It's a challenging role. It's a challenging environment on the president's detail. And with that, I certainly worked hard to kind of give them as much of a quality of life balance as I could. Certainly supported them as it pertained to career development, whether it's promotion or just non-supervisory assignments, moving off the detail. That is, one of the things I take great pride in is those that are, willing to step up and do those assignments, that we support them on the back end. In terms of historical significance, I'll let other people be the judge of what that means in terms of down the road. But I was honored to do the assignment for about 2 years.
As someone who's championed career progression, can we just take a step back and talk about maybe some of your early years and what led you down the path to becoming the SAC for PPD?
Sure. So I started my career in the New York field office, where I worked, in my phase one of my career. So worked counterfeit cases, worked credit card cases, did a couple of years in our technical operations squad. So doing technical security work, both investigatively and protection as it pertains to bomb sweeps, chem bio type hazards. From there, moved on to DC, transferred into DC, spent a short time in our dignitary protection division with Secretary Chertoff when he was Secretary of Homeland Security. From there, moved on to the Vice President's detail, where I did about 5.5 years started under Vice President Cheney and then transitioned over to Vice President Biden with their election in 2008. And from there, moved over to our criminal investigative division for a short time in the special projects section, then got promoted to my first supervisory assignment as the assistant to the special agent in charge within our aerospace security program, where I really specialized in the counter drone program. It's kind of the infancy of that threat really manifesting itself here in the U.S. We had a drone, fall into a tree on the White House property. It did get a lot of international coverage within the media. So I, working with Technical Security Division, Department of Defense, and others, really kind of walking that path in terms of countermeasures development, and kind of at the forefront of that. Pretty proud of the work we did collectively on that. From there, I went over as the ASAC, Assistant Special Agent in Charge of the Office of Protective Operations, working for the Assistant Director. I kind of carried that counter drone work with me for another couple of years. Worked on the White House fence redesign, the special projects section, somewhat of a catch-all, ranging from correspondence and responding to congressional inquiry to kind of programmatic management of various technical enhancements around the White House. So that's what I did there. 2 years later, then promoted to GS-15 inspector within the inspection division, where I then handled both compliance matters and then obviously integrity, internal affairs type matters. Did that about a year, and then was promoted to the deputy special agent in charge of the Miami field office, where I thought, I'd finished my career. I thought, the hope was to compete for the special agent in charge position at some point. Then at some point prior to the campaign, I was asked to help run then candidate Biden's campaign team, and obviously post-election as he won. And then I was asked to then come up as a member of PPD. So that's kind of my path to PPD.
How do you think both being part of the investigative side and the protective side, how do they augment each other?
They definitely complement each other. It's really important to be able to start in that investigative role in a field office somewhere to kind of hone those skills. A big part of protection, again, I'll talk to that, is being able to talk to people, being able to diplomatically work through problems. Those are things that you can hone in investigations, whether it's interviewing a suspect or interviewing a corroborating witness. These are things that not everybody wants to kind of cooperate in those environments. And working through and having some of that kind of oral communication skills is huge as it pertains to protection. And then, obviously some of the maturity that comes with just several years in law enforcement, and then before you transition over to a permanent protective role. So they certainly complement each other. It would be a challenge to come right into this agency and go right into protection.
That really does highlight that for someone operating at your level, there are a considerable number of skills that they pick up along the way, and they carry those skills from position to position to position. And when you're in the position of protecting the president, you have all those skills with you. What can you share with our listeners about that particular role?
So I think what's unique about the role is PPD is one of the largest workforces in the agency. It's the largest special agent workforce within the entire Secret Service. So it's a large workforce. With that, so I have all the executive responsibilities of strategy, personnel matters, administrative matters, budgeting. We have a large budget. All of those things kind of fall under my area of responsibility. But then I have an operational responsibility. So I travel with the president. So it takes me away. So it's unique in that even as an executive, I'm not behind a desk all the time. There are times where I am, but I am away for extended periods. So managing all those roles and responsibilities don't go away just because the president's traveling out of the country for a week or 10 days. I take it with me. So time management is definitely one of the keys to success of the position. But in terms of some of those intangible skills, I think the time management is definitely one of them. Crisis management is definitely going to be one of those things. Much that happens raises to at least some level of crisis, some bigger than others. Many things that happen within the PPD, it's public facing, right? So many of those things will end up in the media, and many of them will end up in international news. And I, did deal with some of those matters. So, balancing that is one of the things is definitely critical.
Talking within the confines of OPSEC, because a lot of what you do is definitely, you're protecting one of the most important, if not the most important person on the planet. And with that comes a lot of operational security that you have to be mindful of. But you're also protecting dignitaries and protecting the president is a very exclusive occupation. Is there anything people would be surprised to learn about that?
So I think the thing that would surprise people most about my role is people see, me on the news or saw me on the news when I was there getting off Air Force One, riding in the presidential limo, flying on Marine One, and they think about the pageantry that goes into that. An estimation here, I would say that's 20% of my life, my existence. The other 80% is dealing with challenges behind the scenes, right? Working security plans for the next trip, because even though you're on one trip, but you might have another trip the next day. So, so my role is much more behind the scenes than many people think. It's not all just flying on Air Force One.
But I'm glad you mentioned Air Force One because, as someone who's never been on Air Force One, that does sound really cool. What are some of the other cool things that you've done or any memorable moments you've had in the agency?
I would say, as it pertains to my role in PPD, a couple of things that certainly stick out in terms of travel would be traveling with President Biden to Geneva, Switzerland. I don't remember the month, but it was in 2021 for a summit with Vladimir Putin, just a bilateral summit, just the two of them. Very unique. Obviously, the last time the two had met face-to-face, and then obviously we are now in the Ukraine conflict. I can't imagine a scenario where the President of the United States and President Putin are going to be meeting face-to-face anytime soon. So there was a historic value to that. Very interesting to be part of that. Queen Elizabeth's funeral certainly was a highlight there. Admittedly, I can't say that I follow the royals that closely, but I do truly respect what Queen Elizabeth did in power for 70 years and the way she kind of, upheld that and represented the UK. So to be part of that was one of those moments that was somewhat surreal, particularly at the funeral itself in Westminster Abbey, thousands of people inside the Abbey. But with that, I would say, just an estimation, probably 5 Americans inside, to include the president, first lady, Meghan Markle, the site agent, and myself. Probably would have been it. So that was one of those main moments of like, wow, can't really believe that I'm here right now. And then the last thing would be, the trip to Ukraine, the president's secretive trip to Ukraine.
And that's an interesting trip because it had never been done before and it was done on a train. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So I'm going to be a little vague in the response. Much of how we conducted that trip are still in the classified, kind of realm. What I can say though is, it was a challenge from the get-go. The agency's been doing war zone trips since the post 9/11 days, right? George Bush did the first trip to Baghdad secretively, and we kind of came up with a formula. It is very dangerous. I'm not minimizing what those trips were. There's a high level of risk in all of them, and secrecy is the key. But with those roles, with those trips, you're relying on U.S. forces. It's our conflict. We control the battle space to a certain extent, and we certainly control the skies in those, both Afghanistan and Iraq. Ukraine was a totally different scenario in the sense that we don't control that space. It is not our conflict. We don't have U.S. forces. So right away is, how do we maintain secrecy? How do we do this when we don't have our normal trusted partners in doing that? So, and how we did that, unfortunately, I'm going to kind of have to leave some of those details out. But I will say, right away, the first glaring thing for us is, how do we get the president there, right? We could not fly for a variety of reasons as it pertains to threats. You just couldn't fly in there. So previous protectees of Secretary of State had taken the train. So we had some kind of anecdotal, stories on how that could work. But of all the ways I'd transport the president, train would rank pretty low, frankly. But we were relegated to that as really our only option. So it was a challenge, is a significant understatement to do that. It's the hardest thing that I've been part of as it pertains to protection. Probably, arguably one of the more complicated things we've done historically as it pertains to the president and moving him with all that needed to be done in the secrecy, the way we do it, and the train. So, it is public knowledge. It was a 10-hour train ride in and almost 10 hours on the way out. So very long time, long duration on that train.
And I can only imagine how stressful that is when your job is to protect somebody on a 10-hour train ride.
It was, right? There's, even though it was overnight, there wasn't much sleep going on by anybody in that. So, I got to say, I've never been so proud of my workforce and our support entities and how we pulled that off. The planning that went into it was elongated, and it was very intense, and how that all played out. But then the execution by our teams and our people, and the people that went, some more people that were in country to receive us, just the resourcefulness and what they did was truly amazing.
And I think you're really touching up, because you mentioned this a lot, one of the key elements of your job is travel. And that certainly can wreak havoc with your work-life balance. Were you able to find a balance for that?
So it is a challenge. My goal was always, I said earlier, was to try to find some, work-life balance for my employees. The reality of the role, especially in charge of PPD, is difficult. You're somewhat at the beck and call of the staff and things that happen. And when that phone rings, it could be the director of the Secret Service, it could be the assistant director, it could be senior staff, it could be the president himself. So there's not a lot of letting it roll to voicemail, right? So that you're never really off duty with that. So, did my best. I have a very understanding family with that. But it is difficult to find that perfect balance. And that's one reason you don't see, especially in charge, spend 10 years. It has happened historically, a long time ago. I don't know how they did it. Kudos to them for being able to pull that off. But in modern history, it's a shorter duration, usually 18 months to 3 years is what you've probably seen in the last 25 years has been more the standard on that. 5-10 years just really is there may be those superstars and superheroes that can pull that off, but it is difficult. And admittedly, it is hard to find that because you're just never really off duty.
Yeah. So you mentioned, you pick up the phone and it could be the president on the phone. I mean, you've worked VPD, you've worked PPD. You are shoulder to shoulder with the most powerful person in America. What are your conversations like with them?
So, I can't get really too much into what we would talk about, right? majority of our time, it would be professional. I may be briefing him on something as it pertains to a given trip, right? It would be, protests or, a flow of how things are going to go that day. It can delve into obviously personal conversations. We've known each other for a long time. I'll reserve to have those conversations between myself and the president. But I do serve as kind of the primary spokesperson, that one voice policy for the division and somewhat for the agency in some regard day to day as it pertains to the president.
I'm going to be honest. I was actually really excited about this interview because I've interviewed quite a few people. And in the history of 20 years of interviewing people, I've interviewed hundreds, if not thousands. And the one thing that really excited me about this interview is you really did have a front seat to history. You were basically riding shotgun with the president for years. Do you ever just reflect on the gravitas of some of what you've done in life?
So admittedly, I didn't do it as much as I should have. I think one of the challenges, again, the churn and the operational tempo of what we're doing, it just continues to come fast and furious. So it is hard to reflect in that moment, at least for me. But now that I've been away from it, even for 1 month, there's a little bit, I'm in that nostalgic period right now, right? So I do look back and I do truly appreciate and honored that I have been able to be part of these things. And again, I talked about the Queen's funeral and some of these other events. And look, I'm a small town boy. I grew up in a very small town of a couple thousand people in central New York. So to be able to be, to come from that and then be provided this opportunity to kind of live alongside, somewhat in a back seat, but I'm there seeing it. It's an honor, right? And I think as time progresses, I think I'll appreciate it even more. I've got a lot of pictures and a lot of things that have been provided to me to kind of stoke those remembrances. But admittedly, I probably should have appreciated it a little more as I was going. But again, that pace just gets to you, and just a lot of challenges. You just got to keep adapting to the situation. So it's hard to kind of, sit back on your laurels at the moment.
In the spirit of reflecting back on it, a lot of what you're talking about, I just cannot even comprehend the immense amount of stress that position has. What was the most challenging part of that role, and how do you deal with that level of stress?
It is difficult. I had your hair before I entered the parole, I swear. No, it can be a challenge. You learn to somewhat kind of sleep with, maybe one eye or one ear open, because you always expect those phone calls to come overnight. And that is a reality, and many times they do. You manage it the best you can. You try to, when you can, spend good quality time away, but the consequences of failure loom large, and they're ever present in the role. So that is something that you just have to deal with. In terms of the significant challenge, I think that we deal with as a SAIC of PPD. I think that the biggest challenge will always be, I'll say we have a wonderful relationship with the Biden administration, previous administrations. But one of the things that is a challenge is any given administration, Republican, Democrat alike, their job is to create an agenda and then go amplify that agenda and tout their successes and get out there and obviously engage with the public, right? Secret Service is coming at it from the opposite end of the spectrum. We'd prefer to just keep him at the White House. He's safest, right? Easy. That's obviously not realistic, right? So somehow we have to come and meet in the middle on that. I have policies, I have left and right limits that I have to stay within, but within those confines, there's a lot of diplomacy and do that. And that's a challenge. And again, it's every administration. And again, I have really wonderful friends there. And, we have some of those spirited debates on how we administer our roles, but, we have to meet together. They've got a responsibility, and it's critically important, obviously, for every administration to tout their successes. We need to keep him safe. So we meet on that. So I think that's always one of the biggest challenges of the role, is how we do that successfully, where we both succeed in our missions.
And when it comes to safety, I mean, there's definitely got to be, as you said, a level of compromise. What would you consider, or has there ever been a time that you just felt unsafe or you were in a dangerous location that you had to take a pause?
So, I mean, we've already talked about Ukraine. Obviously, lots of concerns. It's pretty well done. There are, a lot of trips, particularly as we go, overseas, where you have an elevated threat level. Our Protective Intelligence and Assessment Division does an amazing job giving us both classified and unclassified intelligence to give us the situational awareness on the ground. From that, we make assessments. on those things. But, we're very fortunate that I always felt like in my time there, we were, within those kind of, safety confines. We may, you know, alter schedule slightly or, things like that, but we didn't have to necessarily come off schedule considerably or cancel an event based on that.
A lot of what you're talking about, I mean, we're talking about stress. We're talking about responsibility. We're talking about danger. And PPD, especially that particular role, you're exposed to all of those. When you look back on it, that's probably like the negative part of PPD. Is there anything that you miss about PPD?
Oh, there's a lot I miss. Really camaraderie, right? There's something about being on protective details, VPD, PPD, all of the protective details. You're just in it together, right? It can be challenging, but you go through that, the commiseration and everything else that goes with that. It builds a lot of camaraderie. So I'll miss that. Speaking personally, I do miss some of that identity of mission, right? We in the Secret Service, we have an identity no matter what role you're in. Investigative protection, we all identify, and we take great pride in that. Speaking for me, when I've been assigned to protected divisions, it just amplifies that and just that adherence to mission. So I will miss some of those things as it pertains to the new role.
I know you're an executive now, and I really do appreciate you carving out time to come down here. Is there anything, do you have any parting messages for our listeners? Anything you'd like to say?
Well, I would say if there's any listeners that are considering careers in law enforcement, I would highly implore people to give us a look, do a little research. I think that what the Secret Service can offer is really just an amazing experience. Again, coming from a small town, I've traveled to over 60 countries in my career, and been part of some historic events, and it's really just been an amazing experience that I couldn't have ever imagined in my wildest dreams. There are challenges, there are sacrifices. You'll miss some holidays, you'll miss some birthdays, and I'm not downplaying the significance of that, but I do think at the kind of towards the latter stages of my career, I think that the pluses and the things that I've been able to experience certainly outweigh those sacrifices that happen. So if you're interested in a career in service and you've got a little bit of an adventurous spirit as it pertains to travel, I can't think of many careers that would, outpace the Secret Service.
Well, I think that's very wise words. So thank you, sir. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Abel. Appreciate it.
A big thanks to Darryl Volpicelli for sitting down with us. I took up a lot more time than I thought, but I appreciate you being a good sport. Thanks for sharing your stories and thoughts. Everyone on the team had a lot of fun on this episode. For our listeners, I'm sorry we couldn't get all of his stories in this episode, but some of them are a bit sensitive. If you want to make your own interesting stories, you're going to have to join the agency. Start your Secret Service journey at secretservice.gov or usajobs.gov. For Standing Post in the United States Secret Service, I'm Abel Trevino. Thanks for listening, and as always, stay vigilant.
Chris, if I'd given you a mug for this, I would take it back.